You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. I'm Jill Waterman, the show's creative producer. I'm also host of our new monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. There are many different ways to look at culture, and today we'll take a geographic approach. The site of our discussion is Romania, where we'll focus in on the rustic landscape of small farms, hand-tilled fields, and local communities that still identify with the working methods and traditions of the past. Along the way, we'll follow the cyclical work of farmers and shepherds, gain insight into the Orthodox faith, explore vibrant holiday celebrations, and reveal unique rituals with pagan roots. My guest for today's show is Daniel Rosca, a Romanian photographer and travel guide specialized in photographic and cultural tours. As a child, Daniel experienced the age-old traditions of rural Romania firsthand during time spent on his grandparents' farm. Following university, he spent 4 years abroad working in youth development, consulting, and corporate social responsibility. After living in Brussels, Warsaw, Istanbul, and Cairo, and traveling to another 40 countries on 4 continents, Daniel decided travel should become his full-time job. He chose to return to his homeland in 2011 to help curious travelers immerse themselves in and capture images of old-world Romanian culture. In summary, to quote the motto of his photo tour site, Veni, Vidi, Click. Daniel Rosca, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jill. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about Romania to your audience.
Yeah, great speaking with you today. So, Romania has a very complex history with origins dating back to the Dacian and Roman empires. And this history blends elements of several different cultures, including Hungarian, German, Roma, Jewish, Serbian, Balkan, Ukrainian, Russian, Turkish, and so on. Given all these factors, how would you best describe Romanian culture today?
Well, you use the word blends, and I think that's how I would use it too. So our name, Romania, comes from Romans. We used to be conquered by the Roman Empire, but there is ancestors we have before that, which are called the Dacians. It's an empire that has disappeared after it was conquered by the Romans. They had their own language and their own culture. It was quite big, bigger than the Romania it is nowadays. But then the Romans took over. So the language that we use, it's actually the Romance language. It's our closest language to Romanian. It's Latin and Italian. And then history continues. The Romans pulled back, and many others came by, including the Hungarians, the Germans, and all the other ones that you mentioned there. And since we have all these neighbors around here, the influence on our culture has constantly evolved. So it's really a blend. For example, our traditional food, which is a essential part of the culture, we have influences from about 10, 15 different cuisines, ranging from Turkish to German to French and all the other countries that we mentioned.
Quite a tasty mix.
Indeed.
So the country, as you said, has been shaped many times over the centuries as warring adversaries struggled over land grabs. But in terms of visual interest, can you break down the different regions of Romania as they exist today and list some of their photographic highlights?
You know, a different way to put it, when we're talking about photography, for example, we talk about people in the mountains or the hill areas. For me, these are the most interesting ones to go to, because that's where traditions and traditional way of life has been best kept, rather than in the valleys, in the bigger cities, and in the plains of Romania, where much fewer of the traditional elements remain. So, from a photographic perspective and cultural perspective, I find it much more interesting to be in the hilly areas and the mountain areas.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, indeed. For example, Bucharest, it's the capital of Romania, and it's in the plains, it's flat there.
Right.
And to be honest, there isn't that much to do around there. There is always to do for photographers, but it's an area where I rarely spend any time. Bucharest is a big city, also with influences from the Greeks and the Turks and the Russians and the Romans to some extent. It's a interesting mix.
Right.
But besides that, I just move on. So I go to the areas where I know it gets much more interesting.
Yeah.
And now to refer to the historic regions of Romania, without getting into history lessons and being totally correct about history, there is three big regions. There is other smaller ones, and I'm going to refer less to those other ones.
Mm-hmm.
And the most famous one is Transylvania.
Right.
Then we have Wallachia, the part in the south, which is where Bucharest is, and Moldova, the part in the east. And Moldova, it's a wider region, which is now half part of Romania, half as an independent republic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, coincidentally or not, the region which is the most interesting one to photograph is Transylvania region, because that's also happens to be more in the mountains and in the hills. Historically, these three regions, Transylvania, Moldova, and Wallachia, they've had their own independent history for about 900 years. So Transylvania was under Hungarian and Austro-Hungarian rule for most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Wallachia had mostly to do with the Ottoman Empire, while Moldova had to do with the Ottoman, but also with the Russian and to a much lesser extent to the Polish.
Mm.
And only in 1918, these three regions united and formed Romania as more or less we have it nowadays.
Right. Right.
So Transylvania, it's a place with large ethnic diversity. There is a lot of medieval fortifications, castles, fortified churches, walled towns, and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Then in northern Transylvania, there is a region which I consider part of Transylvania too. Historians will disagree with this, but to simplify, I would call Maramuresh as part of Transylvania because it has been under the Austro-Hungarian rule for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the most interesting parts because it's so far away from civilization over the centuries. It kept its identity much more well preserved than other parts have.
Right. Right.
Right?
And it's a very agricultural area, isn't it?
Yes, for European standards, Romania is still a largely agricultural society. So
Mm.
we have about 50% of the population still lives in rural areas. And we have the biggest number of small scale farms, subsistence farms. These are families who own less than like 5 hectares of land.
Mm-hmm.
And often it's just 1 or 2 hectares. So people who have their house in the village have maybe a cow or two, some sheep, some goats, some chicken, dog. And maybe now they also have a job because it's really hard to just live from what you
Right.
but they still continue to grow their own food. Like the pork comes from their own farm, or the chicken or the eggs. So from that perspective, Romania still has the biggest number of such small scale farms in Europe. They used to be like almost 3 million. Now it's maybe 2.5 since we joined the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
But just by comparison, the next countries in terms of number of farms are like Poland or France, which are less than 1 million.
Wow.
From that perspective, rural Romania still preserves a lot of the old ways of doing things, and that's very interesting. So that's where I grew up at my grandparents. We had all those things that I mentioned, and it's fascinating to see that it still exists in the modern Europe we have nowadays,
Right.
and to go there and experience it as a traveler or as a photographer and so on.
Yeah, that's fascinating and very rich, both visually and culturally.
Yeah.
So Based on your experiences leading photo tours, are there any common misconceptions that you find people have on their first visit to Romania?
Yeah, the people who do come to Romania, they're what I call well-traveled people.
Mm-hmm.
So they're discerning travelers. They've been to many countries. They kind of learn to distinguish stereotypes from other things. But if you ask probably the average American or not only American, you name it, Australian or Japanese, what do they know about Romania? The things that come to mind first in terms of words will probably be Dracula and communism. So we do have this association, and in a way it's good, in a way it's not. But I always get questions about these two topics.
Mm-hmm.
And while Dracula kind of creates a sense of mystery and attracts people, even if you're not the vampire fan, it still creates some sort of excitement in people's heads. But the communist part is the part that I think people associate Romania more with and kind of keeps them away because it's perceived as this gray area with a lot of these communist blocks of flats. And it's true, we have been under communism for about 40 years, but the historical scale is not much. We have a history of
Mm-hmm.
2,000 years or more. But of course, it's recent, right? So that's what people know. I mean, I was born during the communist time, but since then, 35 almost years have passed. So things have changed. And I think the fact that we're now part of the European Union, we're part of NATO, and the things are opening up with things like social media. People get to know about Romania not only through whatever media portrays, but also about what other people share on their social media channels.
Mm-hmm. Romania is a very strong place for tech and internet and all of that, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. I mean, if we're just to take the average speed of internet in Romania, it's one of the fastest in the world. It keeps changing from year to year, but we skipped some stages of having the dial
Right.
up and all that. And we just went to the fast internet.
Went straight to high speed.
High speed, yes. So
Yeah.
that's why in most places in Romania, you get good internet connection. And we have pretty good schools for IT and engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I guess
Yeah.
smart people like everywhere. So yeah, IT, it's a big thing in Romania these days.
Interesting. So, turning back to the idea of photographing in Romania,
Yeah.
are there special considerations to keep in mind, especially like when photographing people on the street, either in urban or rural settings?
Yeah, of course. It's like everywhere. There is some general aspects and there is some cultural aspects.
Mm-hmm.
In big cities, like city people, they don't really like to be photographed, or of policemen, military, stuff like that. You don't just photograph those ones. They find it weird that someone comes to them and photographs them. I mean, you can do street photography, you can have people walk into your picture and things like that, and they're not going to mind. But the interesting characters are the ones in rural areas.
Right.
And here it really depends on the region. There is regions where people are much more friendly and nice,
Mm-hmm.
open to interact with you first of all, and then to be photographed, and regions where the people are less. For example, my favorite region to interact with people and photograph is in the north, in Maramuresh region. But if you go all the way to the south, there people are much more suspicious and closed to being photographed.
Interesting.
Yes, and then I mentioned that the name Romania comes from the Roman Empire, but also a common misconception about Romania is the fact that we are the country from where the Roma people are, or the Gypsies.
Right.
And that's just a coincidence of names. They don't come from Romania, but about 4 or 5% of the population is Roma. And while they're interesting to photograph, definitely, they are kind of difficult to deal with. First of all, they don't like to be photographed. And if they do, they will often ask for money. And that negotiation with their language skills is not going to go very well. I'm always aware and I tell people that with the Roma, we got to be careful, or we got to approach it in a certain way.
And are the Roma generally sort of transitory, they don't have a fixed home so much?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's a misconception about the Roma people. At least in Romania, most Roma people are now settled. During the communist times, Romania went through a period of industrialization. They created a lot of housing. They wanted people to stay put and
Mm-hmm.
do something. So part of this process, they have also been asked to stay here and not move around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they can keep track of them and also put them to work. So no,
Right.
nowadays most of them, they are
Settled in communities.
maybe once a year I see some people with a caravan going around, but that's becoming less and less common.
Right. So you mentioned that military and police are not so open to being photographed. Would that be problematic? Would they actively come and stop someone if they were trying to photograph
No,
them?
so I guess there is countries where things like this will get you in trouble,
Right.
but here not. I mean, I think most photographers, they know you don't go and photograph a military guy or a policeman. They're having their jobs. There's places where there's clear signs you should not photograph here, like on military sites and things like this. In my experience, nobody got in trouble because of trying to photograph, but they have really no interest to do it. So they come here for different reasons. There's other interesting characters and people that they focus on.
One little aside that I did not know, and it was only through conversation with somebody that I learned, in other countries, one can, have a drink and there's a sort of level of alcohol that is acceptable to drive. But in
Yeah.
Romania, from what I understand, there is no tolerance for alcohol.
Yeah,
If-
zero.
If you're stopped on the road and you've had one drink, there's no tolerance for that.
Yeah, there's no tolerance and it's very strict. I mean, the legislation keeps changing and is becoming more and more strict. But for example, your insurance may not cover damages that you've done if you're proven that you had at least a sip of something. So if anyone is listening and wants to come to Romania and have a glass of wine, don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Just don't do it.
The example that someone gave me was, I guess, maybe hypothetical, but a person had eaten a chocolate that had a little bit of liquor in it and happened to get pulled over by the police. And it registered on whatever scale they used to test. And they didn't even have a full drink. They just ate a chocolate.
Yeah.
It's really surprising.
Yeah.
But good warning to listeners.
Yeah.
So, as you said, throughout Romania, it's common to find people still working in traditional methods and materials, both in agriculture in the fields and within the arts and crafts. What are some of the most popular of these situations that you found people like to photograph?
Yeah. So one of the most interesting things, it's the haymaking. And again, where it's flat, they use machinery. So it's not going to be exciting. But where it gets more hilly, close to mountains, the valleys are narrower and there is just less farmland and the people cannot justify buying machinery to work the fields. They still do the hay by hand. Even the scything part, they still cut it by scythe.
Wow.
There are less and less of those, but I know what they are. So they do it with the scythe, and then to turn the hay to dry, they also do it with the rake rather than some machinery. And then when they pile it, instead of making these round bales wrapped in plastic, they make like a haystack, which looks like a bell.
Right, right, like a little mountain.
Yeah. So especially, if you come to those parts of the country in months like September, you will see the countryside dotted with the haystacks, and it can be many, many, many of them. And also to transport the hay, people will have a barn at home. At some point, they fill the barn and then they leave the rest of the hay on the fields. And to transport it from the field to the home, often they still now use horse carts or some small tractors. And this horse cart part happens in the winter time too, because once they deplete the hay from home, Then they have to go back to the field where they've left the hay in the summer and
Right.
take it back home. So sometimes in the middle of January, when it's cold and snowy, you see a horse cart on the road going with a load of hay.
Hmm. And the hay would be used primarily for livestock?
Livestock, yes. So I was telling about still millions of households in Romania which have some little land, and they have a cow or two to get milk to make some cheese,
Hmm.
or they have horse or some goats or sheep. So they need the hay for feeding their livestock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, when there's big farms, you cannot do this by hand. So Romania is about a third mountains, a third hilly, and a third flat, more or
Mm.
less. Yes, you have a third of the country is very good farmland, is this black soil. But then in the hills and the mountains is not that good for
Mm.
big crops. So
Hmm.
it's used more like as a pasture or hay fields and things like that.
Right. 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 And what about the traditional methods within arts and crafts
Mhm.
and
Yeah, so I mentioned the hay. I want to mention two other things here. One is the horse carts. And once you have horse carts and working horses, you also need blacksmiths. Yes.
mm,
So
hmm
there's the, workshops where they have the blacksmiths that do the traditional way of putting on the horseshoes. Okay.
right.
And that's really fascinating to see. Then another part related to agriculture that is interesting in Romania is the shepherding, which is still done the old way. It's not like in England where you have 200 sheep and you make a fenced area and you let them graze there and you just take them in the autumn. No, here in Romania, people raise their sheep also for milk. So they make cheese out of it.
Hmm.
So you gotta milk it. In the summer, they milk it 2 or 3 times a day, hundreds of sheep. Okay,
Mm,
it's hard work, but it's very interesting for us to see. Yeah, when they come and gather all the sheep and put them in the pan and take them out and milk them and so on.
right.
Um,
Right.
there is always a shepherd because in Romania we have bears and wolves. So they need the
Right.
dogs and the shepherd to be with them nonstop. So this whole part of shepherding in Romania, I find it fascinating. And all over the country, you will see flocks of sheep with the shepherd and up to 10, 12 dogs going
Wow.
around. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you asked about some crafts. First that comes to mind is the painting eggs for Easter.
Yes.
Yes, all of us in Romania, we paint the eggs for Easter.
Mm,
But there is a certain part of the country in Bukovina where they decorate them.
hmm
They make much more advanced, complicated decorations on them, from the religious motives to putting patterns from traditional clothes and textiles on those eggs. Some of them are really a piece of art. So if someone comes to Romania and wants to get a souvenir, an egg would be my recommendation.
mm,
Though
hmm
they are fragile because it's a real egg. You can find wooden ones, but those are not the good ones that I'm talking about. Those ones are meant to last, but the beautiful ones are the real ones.
And are they like chicken eggs or?
Mostly duck eggs. They are harder than the
Hmm.
chicken eggs. And goose, I've seen people painting also on ostrich eggs and so on. Those ones are hard and they will last better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as a travel guide and photo tour leader, you've cultivated very close relationships with many of these people who do traditional crafts, and you make arrangements so they allow themselves to be photographed. What is that process like?
hmm Yeah. So I think most important is that I make friends with those people. I have a good human relationship with them.
Hmm.
And I'm happy to see that they're happy to see me, and they are open enough people to have other people to see them as well doing their
Right.
thing. I mean, I know blacksmiths, I know coppersmiths, or I know someone working wood, I know a shepherd, and so on. So I call them in advance just to confirm that I'm coming and to go there at a time when they're actually doing something. So, for example, if they are shepherds, I go there at the time when they milk the sheep. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise they're in the field with them somewhere grazing, so it's hard to find them, or
Right. Right.
it's not going to be as interesting or easy to access.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's a blacksmith, I ask him, do you have something to work? Do you have a horse coming for putting on the horseshoes? At what time? Usually this happens in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to go there at the time when I know they do something.
Yeah.
And in exchange for their time, with some of them I don't pay. They're happy to have people coming by.
Right.
And others definitely enjoy some extra money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I prefer to pay them rather than them having something to sell, which then creates this commercial situation where to
Right.
make some money he needs to push his products and try to advertise it to
Mm-hmm.
the group I'm going with there too. So this part I don't like, I discourage, rather than being
Interesting.
but if they have something they sell, I tell the group in advance, look, they will have these things, if you want. For example, the coppersmiths, they make all kinds of copper objects, and they're beautiful and unique and handmade and so on. But I
Mm-hmm.
tell them, look, if you want to buy any of those, only show interest at the end, okay? Let's go
Right.
see what they do. Let's go get to know them. Let's photograph them, and then at the end we can get into a transaction with them
Mm-hmm.
if you really want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the basic idea is that you're bringing photo tours, and if these craftspeople are a friend of yours, they
Mm.
become a friend of the people photographing them.
Yeah, yeah. They are open to me, so they're open to the group.
Right, right. What about the question of a model release for a picture? Does that ever come up, or do you discourage that, or is that even feasible?
I mean, over the years, I've noticed that most of the people I travel with, they are like hobby photographers.
Mm-hmm.
So to them, it doesn't matter so much, a model release. They're not
Mm-hmm.
gonna put that picture for sale.
Mm-hmm.
you know they may post it on Instagram, they may use it on their blog, or they may make a book out of it. But to sell it commercially, very, very, very few do
Right,
this.
right.
There was one, she submitted her pictures for a competition, and I think she won some prize there, and she wanted to have a model release so they can then use the picture that she took.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
More and more photo competitions are saying that you need a model release for the
Hmm.
pictures you submit. And
Yeah.
if you do win, you have to show that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So it was one case like this.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So, do you have any advice for independent photographers who may be traveling without an organized group and wanting to photograph farmers, craftspeople, how to approach them, ways to negotiate access to take pictures?
Yeah, so I mean, there is many things to say about this. I've seen photographers who are really hungry to get their shots,
Hmm.
and really nobody appreciates those. Okay, not the person you're meeting, not me as an organizer, and so on. Because even though we are photographers, and what makes us photographers, holding a camera, we're still people. Yes,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
it's still a human connection.
Exactly.
I think the first thing is to be able to establish a human connection. And sometimes you don't really need the language to establish the human connection. I don't know. You can uh,
Hmm.
go and just pay attention to what people are doing. Try to show interest into what people are doing, even if you would not have the camera. I mean, if you would lose your camera the next day, and what, you would just go back home the next day? No, you would still be interested to explore the country and meet those people. So try to interact with people as if you would not have a camera, and then
Right.
let that stage happen. And then at some point, if you see a situation which is really good and you want to photograph, try to bring up the camera or the discussion about but but I think many people also use this as an excuse. Well, I don't talk to people, so I'm just going to shoot.
Hmm.
um well, I mean, you may do this at, I don't know, some wedding, some crowded event, some festival or something like this. You're not going to socialize with everybody there. But if you're just meeting someone in the field, I think, first of all, try to establish a connection with that person
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
just showing interest in what you're doing. And then get to the photography part. And usually
Mhm.
by putting effort on establishing a relationship or connection, or have enough patience,
Mhm.
sometimes people are not patient. But if you have enough patience and you wait for them to finish their work, well, try to find out what they're going to do next. You will get into other kind of situations,
Right, right.
you will get to take a portrait of them not in the field but also in their traditional room or house or in their barn or something like this.
Yeah.
That's something I've noticed with some of the photographers. They try to burn these steps and just get to the shot.
Mhm.
Okay, sit there, do that, and so on. From what I hear from other photographers, it's one of the countries that is the most easy to approach people and photograph. Again, I'm talking about the rural areas, yes, and
Right.
certain parts of the country.
Mhm.
While here it's relatively easy.
Yeah.
But just be a nice person.
Yeah. Yeah, and some time face to face and a smile works wonders.
Yeah, yeah, smile.
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we go to a break, let's talk gear for a minute. What's your go-to in terms of cameras and lenses?
So I currently use Nikon Z6. Since 2006, I'm mirrorless. One reason I'm particularly happy with it is that when I go inside a church, a house, or something, I don't have that click, 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 especially in a church. And I do this church thing quite a bit. It
Right.
can be very disturbing to hear that shutter, you know.
Yep.
You have the priest and you have the click, click, click. So for this reason, I will never go back to DCLR. And yeah, my favorite lens that I use most of the time is the 2470 f2.8.
Hmm. Yeah, very economical in terms of the range.
Yeah.
So what about accessories like tripods, flash, any other things that you use?
I own a tripod. I rarely use it.
Mm.
Um, I sometimes use it maybe for like a blue hour photography. So I
Hmm.
don't do only people. I do also urban settings or landscapes and things like that. But
Hmm.
with the current camera, I can do a lot of things handheld.
Right.
So I don't feel much of a need of a tripod.
Yeah.
And I don't own, and so therefore I don't carry a flash. Though this is something I'm actually considering getting because sometimes there is just not enough light. So maybe this is something I'm thinking of getting.
Right. And yeah, and lighting has improved so much in recent years. It's a good investment, at least to
Yeah.
have one in your back pocket. But what about the idea of packing and bags and carrying gear? Given that you're leading photo tours, you're traveling with lots of people who have lots of bags. Do you
Mhm.
have any recommendations for bags and packing?
So my personal approach is that I also have a backpack, a
Hmm.
big one, which I almost never carry around. It's just too big. um, and I use a smaller shoulder bag. It's waterproof, where I can fit a body and one or two extra lenses. Also for people photography, especially with a lot of these people that are not used to being photographed, it's maybe first time they're face to face with someone who is like a photographer. It's very intimidating to come up with a very big lens. They'll ask, "Are you from some magazine? Are you from
Right.
the TV? Where are you gonna post my pictures?" So they become just a lot more concerned with things. So the fact that I have something smaller, which looks more like a well, okay, not so serious guy, for me it's an advantage.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, and overall, yes, I travel lighter. Yes, just with my shoulder bag, the camera. Yeah.
But when you're on big trips with larger groups of people, do you ever have to restrict the amount of bags other people bring?
The vehicle we use, we try to adapt it to the group size.
Hmm.
So we never fill it up in terms of seats because we know that we need the space for people to put their camera. So, I mean, there's people who bring a big backpack, there's people who bring two bodies, but it hasn't really been an
An
issue
issue.
in terms of space because if we have a group of 10, we usually use a vehicle of like 19 seats, so there is enough space
Mm-hmm.
to
Hmm.
put your bags.
Good to know. So we're going to take a short break. And when we return, we'll talk more with Daniel Rosca and learn about Romanian culture. Stay tuned. I hope you're enjoying this chat with Daniel Rosca for my monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. I'd really love to hear your thoughts about this episode and my series in general. So please leave a rating and post a review on Apple Podcasts. And stay tuned for my next episode and a conversation with Canadian photographer Rita Leisner, which drops Thursday, April 4th. Okay, we are back with Romanian photographer and tour guide Daniel Rosca, and we've been covering the basics of Romanian culture and photography logistics. Now let's focus in on the colorful part, Romanian folk culture and the varied celebrations and festivals this entails. So, Daniel, religion is a big part of Romanian life, with most people being Romanian Orthodox, which generally offers a visually rich palette. Are there visual differences to Orthodox churches in various parts of the country?
Yes. There's many ways to classify churches, but one simple way for me is there's wooden churches and there's brick or stone churches.
Mm-hmm.
And quite interesting ones to me and to many people I travel with is the wooden churches, because it's not something that you get to see every day. Also, coming back to what I said about, is it in the hilly areas, it's in the mountains, or it's in the plains? Well,
Right.
for me, I find that the churches that are in the hilly and the mountain areas, they're much more interesting because they get more background, or you get to sit on another hill and look at that church, while where it's very flat, there is less to play with.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a wooden church against a mountain backdrop, or you look down at it from another hill nearby, it's much more interesting.
Right.
So I'm talking from the exterior, and I'm talking only about the Orthodox ones because we have many different kinds of churches in Romania. They also look different. Some of them are more simple with one tower. Other ones are much more complicated with two towers or another part of the body that stands out. So a lot of crosses sitting up there, they're not shy to put intricate decorations on them and so on. So
Right.
that's just from exterior point of view. Also in Romania, among the Orthodox churches, we have painted churches. Orthodox churches are painted on the inside almost fully,
Mm-hmm.
unlike other denominations. But we also have some which are painted on the outside. And the paintings on some of those are like 500 years old and they're still there. So
Wow.
that makes it very interesting. So like painted monasteries in Bukovina.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So Bukovina is in the north, is that correct?
Yes, it's Romania is bordering Ukraine to the north.
Mm-hmm.
And this Bukovina region, it's a region that it's partially in Romania, partially in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking about the Romanian part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, are there specific rules of etiquette for photographing inside churches or when there are services or officiants involved?
Kind of.
Mhm.
I mean, to go in 10 people at the same time in a church, it's overwhelming, you know?
Right.
So, one thing is that we don't go all at the same time. It is challenging because another kind of rule I have, just because I find it's common sense, is that you don't just go in and go out. It creates this kind of motion.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily, Romanian services take time. They're 2-3 hours long. Okay, so you have the time to do this. If we go to a Sunday service at the church, people are going to be there for at least 2 hours. So with the group, we split, but it's a waiting game. Yes, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Some will have to stay outside while others go in, and so on. And I also tell people when I go in, I try to hide my camera. Okay, I put it under
Mm-hmm.
my jacket because people will see you. They notice you with the corner of their eye or whatever. And then I just sit on a chair. I sit there or I stay in a corner, and I try to stay there for at least 3-5 minutes
Mm-hmm.
until people kind of forget about me.
Mm-hmm.
And this way also gives me the opportunity to see what's happening. I scan the room, see who are the interesting ones, where is the light coming from, to kind of think of my composition and of something that I would like to see. I try to follow to see what the priest is doing. Do I want to have him in the picture or not? I try, for example, not to sit right at the back and you
Mm-hmm.
go straight towards the altar where the priest is. So that's the part where I try not to stay, because that's also where the priest is looking. I try to sit more on the corners, left,
Mm.
right. But I do prefer to sit at the back. To go in front and be there next to the priest and photograph, looking back at the people, is very distracting for everybody. It's distracting for the priest, it's distracting for the people who are sitting. So the pictures are more like from behind.
Right, right.
Also, quite a few of the churches, they have a balcony.
Mm.
So from the back, usually where you enter into to the church, there is some stairs that take you up on a balcony, which is towards the back of the church, and from there you can look down towards where the priest is, where the people are staying. It's a different angle. You don't see necessarily the people's faces, but this way you capture more of how the church looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Now, typically you should have permission from the priest to photograph.
Mm.
Okay, and this is what I was told in the first years, but with time I got to know some priests, so I go there and they see me and it's fine. If I respect these rules of trying to be more like subtle and maybe
Right.
using the balcony and not having the shutter and getting in, getting out, moving around, you gotta be very respectful. It's not
Exactly.
no go, but do it in a sensitive way. They don't mind.
Hmm. And make it more about the contemplative aspects
Yeah.
than the shooting aspects.
There is also some of these painted monasteries with these frescoes from like 500 years old.
Hmm.
Inside, you're not allowed to take pictures because it was from the time with the flash. Don't use flash because they damage the,
Right.
the paintings. But also because there's a lot of visitors that go to there. They're open to the public all the time. It will. I get it. To go to a place and it's a place of worship and everybody can take pictures because it's interesting, is just very, very distracting.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand why they don't allow. You can take pictures of the exterior.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I have some priest friends. For example, I go for Christmas or Easter. I then send them pictures of mine, and then they post it on their Facebook page and so on. So we have a good relationship with them.
Hmm. So the timing of the Orthodox calendar often differs from the same holidays in Catholic or Protestant religions.
Yeah.
Does that allow for more picture opportunities across different religions?
Yeah, so it's quite complicated. We are Orthodox, okay? That's maybe something that people are not very familiar with what's
Hmm.
Orthodox. The bigger, let's say, church group is Eastern Orthodox, part
Hmm.
of which are the Greek, the most famous one. And then, I don't know, Russian is maybe also a famous one. But in total, there is about 15 of them.
Wow.
Yeah, including Serbian, Bulgarian, Georgian,
Hmm.
Copt from Egypt, and so on. So Romania is one of those 15 Orthodox churches.
Hmm.
Even though they're all Orthodox, they don't follow the same calendar.
Oh, really? There's
Yes,
even differences within the Orthodox
even
religion.
within the Orthodox.
Wow.
So the part that we do have in common is the Easter.
Hmm.
Okay. So all Orthodox churches follow Easter on the same day, which is different than the Catholic and the Protestant one.
Right.
Okay. Yes. So, for example, this year, the Catholic Easter is on March 31st. Orthodox Easter is on May 5th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, like 5 weeks apart. But there are years when they fall on the same date.
Huh.
So then, yes, in Romania, because we have also Catholics, about 10% of the population, and while Orthodox is like 80 plus, and Catholics, they're mostly Hungarian speakers.
Mm.
You can go to the Hungarian parts of the country to experience a Catholic Easter.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, and then for Christmas, again, there is a difference between the Orthodox and the Catholic, but quite a few of the Orthodox have also moved their Christmas with the rest of the Catholics. Okay.
Oh,
So, for
interesting.
example, we Romanians and the Greeks, and I guess a few more, celebrate Christmas on December 25th.
Mm. Hmm.
Yes, while the Russians, Serbians, and some others, they celebrate Christmas 13 days later. So sometime in January. For example, my wife is Ukrainian, so for them they have the Christmas 13 days later. So we have two Christmases. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Though
Nice.
now in the context of the war from last year, the Ukrainian church and the Russian church, they are dividing,
Hmm.
and the Ukrainians are also, from last Christmas, they decided to celebrate Christmas also on December 25th. Yeah, so yeah, there is some, let's say, additional opportunities because of the diversity in religion.
Interesting. So, within the different types of Orthodox religions, are there visual differences?
Um, th- Orthodox, what I mean, it's a Greek word, and it translates as the right belief.
Hmm.
So there used to be one church, during the Roman Empire, and then they divided to the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire, and then there were different emperors, and one of them said, "Well, I want to have my religion," and the other one said the other religion. So then they split. Yes,
Hmm.
so that's how the Catholic became one big and the Orthodox stayed. That's why the word Orthodox means the right belief. They feel they're closer to,
Right.
Jerusalem and the old teachings of all these apostles or Jesus and so on. So they are kind of uniform in the way they practice religion,
Hmm.
and there is some differences with the Catholics, but
Hmm.
I wouldn't say they are huge. I feel like between Catholics and Protestants, the differences are bigger than what
Right.
we have between us and the Catholics.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on that note, Romania also has a Lutheran heritage
Yeah,
with fortified churches that were built by people of German Saxon descent.
yeah.
And that's very different visually. Are there particular photographic opportunities that you can describe that are associated with those churches in those areas of Romania?
Yeah, so the whole story with the German Saxons from Transylvania region, it's very interesting. Yes, they are different because, well, they were built different. They were built mostly from stone, and they are built mostly in this hilly areas of Transylvania. And at some point, many of these churches were built Catholic and then converted to Lutheranism in the 16th century.
Oh, interesting.
And then, because Romania has been at the crossroads of different empires, they felt the need to fortify their towns. So
Mm,
instead of building a separate fortification, they decided to build a wall around the church.
mm, mhm.
So then it became a fortified church, and locals, when they refer to that site, they refer to the fortress rather than the church. So yeah, it's definitely different. And then because they're in the hilly areas, you go to the nearby hill and you have a perspective on them, So it's
Right.
visually interesting.
So, to shift gears, one of the
Yeah.
most unique and interesting aspects of Romanian traditions are the bear dance festivals that happen between Christmas and New Year. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of these festivals and the places where they're found?
Yes, the bear dance tradition and the festivals that came with it, it's one of the most visually interesting. It's also controversial because people
Mm,
ask, like, what's up with all the bear skins? So here is basically a combination of pagan traditions that have been somehow kept throughout millennia. The bear, it is the most powerful animal we have in nature by our ancestors from 2000 years ago. It has been venerated. In a way, people see that getting on the bear skin, it kind of gets you the power of the bear.
mm,
But the
mhm.
whole thing, it's much more complex. It's also related to the evil spirits of winter and scaring them away. And that's also something pagan, is not something Christian. One of the saying that we have in Romania, if your back hurts, let a bear walk on your back and it will heal you.
Wow.
Yes, this is one of the things that gypsy people were doing. They were training these bears to go with them. And then the people who had the back problems, they would let the bear step on them or something like this,
Seriously.
because the bear has the power. Yes. So
Hmm.
these were real bears. Um, and
Yikes.
yes, I think At some point, it turned into a festival, a small one at the beginning. And
Mm,
then these festivals are becoming bigger and bigger in the last decade. And I think, again,
interesting.
internet and social media have helped to
Right.
promote this kind of tradition, and it's becoming much more known nowadays.
And so it's a very specific region of Romania where this generally
Yes.
happens.
Yes, yes. So there is this one particular area of Romania in the Moldova region, somewhere towards the eastern part of the country, where, of course, it has to be close to the mountains because that's where the habitat of the of the bears is. So there is that valley which used to have a lot of bears, and there was a time when bear hunting was allowed. So then people took a lot of these skins and revived this tradition, and now they have groups of some villages of 80 people dressed up with those bear skins. And it's only at a certain time of the year, yeah, it's related to the New Year
Right.
festivities
Yep.
when this happens.
So, in terms of photographing a bear festival, I mean, it can be rather overwhelming because there's wild costumes, loud music, and big crowds. So, do you have recommendations in terms of how to get the best shots?
As you said, it is overwhelming. And I think also the first time I went to the bear festival, I didn't take that many good pictures because it's really
Mm,
difficult to photograph. But with time, I kind of learned a few things, so I'm sharing them here with you. um, I think finally in the last years, probably the best pictures we take of these people in their bear costumes is if we arrange a separate meeting with them somewhere in a place with a nice background and spend half an hour, 1 hour with them and take the pictures. Because otherwise, during the festival, it's really tough. People are moving,
mhm.
and the background is really difficult. This main festival that happens on December 30th, it's in a town with a lot of these gray buildings and lots of big crowds, so it's tough to photograph. I mean,
Yeah,
you capture the action, but it's hard to be satisfied with the pictures you're taking.
yeah.
So doing the private sessions with the group, it's one of the things. Another is to go to the place where they gather, because festivities start around midday, but
Right.
they start coming from like 10, 11 in the morning. And then they queue up there and, they do all preparations, they warm up and things like that. It's a good place because it's less crowded. You can get their attention. You can get them to look at you. They're not moving that much. So that's a good place to go.
And they're getting psyched up for their performance.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I know background is important. So when I go around where they gather, I try to look for what's a good background and then choose the group that is close to it to photograph. I interact with the subjects. Some of them, I know, they put their bare head away or they put it on their face. So it depends what you want. You want them to cover the face or not, to look at you, not look at you, but you need to interact with them for this purpose. Yeah.
right, right. And the town where the biggest festival is called Comenești. But there's also surrounding villages that have smaller festivals.
Yeah, that's the big one. There's actually two the next day on December 31st. There is another one 2 days before on December 28th. And there's even some other ones in other cities from, let's say, middle of December. They keep having festivals until December 31st.
Interesting. Are there additional things that happen during the year-end holiday season?
Yes. So we have the Christmas related traditions, and then you have the New Year related traditions. Yeah. The
Mm,
Christmas ones, of course, they are more religious. The New Year, they're more about rejuvenations, anyway, the bad spirit, more pagan. And then there is some related to farming. Um,
mhm,
so for Christmas, yes, we have caroling, and there's parts of the country where they dress up in traditional clothes and they go from house to house and sing a carol or two. Traditional ones is not jingle bells and things like that. It's Romanian carols
mhm,
about Mary, Jesus, so
mm,
the whole story there.
mhm.
And then in Maramuresh region, there is also this Viflaim religious theater, which
Oh,
recreates the story of the birth of Jesus.
okay.
Yeah,
Mhm,
Viflaim, it's a word that comes actually from Bethlehem. Okay.
mm.
And then on Christmas Day and the days after, there's people who go to church in traditional clothes. And also in the days before Christmas and after Christmas, there is also some festivals in Maramuresh and Bukovina region, which are much more about those regions and with carolers rather than bears or other kind of traditions that we have in other parts of the country.
So, besides Christmas, Easter, as we discussed briefly earlier, is a big time for celebrations. What kind of activities are held during those times?
We have the Easter preparations. And again, in the more rural parts, this includes like baking certain
Mm,
things, cooking certain dishes. Lamb is our traditional meal for Easter. So, you may go around the village and you see people skinning a lamb and then women cooking it. Then you have the painted eggs, which is specific to the Easter time. And then there is the midnight mass, which is interesting. It's in the dark, it's hard light there. But on the day of Easter in Jerusalem, there is a light that comes out. It's a miracle. And
hmm.
then they light a candle from there. And there's planes that then leave from Tel Aviv to go to all these Christian Orthodox countries and bring that light. And then, they come to Bucharest, and from Bucharest, they fly to all the airports in the country to bring that light that originated in the morning from Jerusalem. And
Wow.
by midnight, it gets to all the churches in Romania. And the priest, during that service, gives light to everybody in the candles.
Uh-huh.
So that's something interesting. And when I go for Easter, I try to catch this part.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and then on Easter Sunday, Easter Monday, when there is services, also in parts of the country, there's people who go and dress in traditional clothes, and they have a food basket that they bring and they lay it out there in the courtyard of the church. And at the end of the service, the priest goes around and blesses that food. And then
Mm,
finally, people can break the fast. Orthodox religion encourages that before Easter there is a fast, which
mm,
basically means eating vegan for the Lent period. So after that, the priest blesses it. You can then go home and eat like eggs, meat, and
right, right.
dairy and stuff like that.
Wow. So it's a change of diet.
Yes, yes.
Huh,
Yes, I
interesting.
mean, this is also another preconception about Romania that we are like meat eaters, and we are meat eaters. But if you're a vegetarian, you're going to have big problems. We know what vegan means because there is the Easter Lent, which is the longest one. Then there is
Hmm.
the Christmas Lent, and then there's a few other holidays that are Lent. And there is people who eat vegan on especially Fridays
Hmm.
and on Wednesdays, some of them, and
Mm.
some even on Monday. So as I grew up with my grandma, I knew that on Friday we would always eat beans without meat.
Right, right. Interesting. Wow. And I didn't realize that there was a fasting aspect to Christmas or other holidays.
Yeah.
Hmm, wow. So besides the major holidays, are there other celebrations or special events that are noteworthy to photograph in Romania?
Yes, there is other ones. Easter and Christmas are of course the big ones, but in these parts of the country, again, Maramuresh, Bukovina mostly, where people dress up in traditional clothes. Saint Mary is also big. Saint Elijah, Epiphany, Ascension, the patron of the church,
Mm,
that particular holiday. So you will see people dressing up and going to church. So that's about religious. Then there is
hmm.
weddings, which I find very interesting. Again, in these northern parts of the country, and people dress up traditional. Then in Transylvania, there is some medieval festivals which are acknowledging the heritage from this part of the world.
Mm,
There is also some shepherding related festivals and events because in the spring, there's still this tradition in some parts of the country. The villagers gather their sheep together and they send them with shepherds in the mountains for grazing, because that's
right.
better grass up there. When they do that, they have to measure how much milk the sheep from each owner has. If they manage to milk 100 liters of milk, and they had sheep from 5 different families or 10 different families. They know what's the quota of each of them, because then in the summer they milk them all together, and then they give them cheese respecting this percentage of how much milk. So they do a milk measurement in
Wow.
the spring, and together with that milk measurement, they do a celebration. And then the next days, the shepherds go with the sheep in the mountains. And then in the autumn, in September, they come back.
So they spend the whole summer in the mountains.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So this is called transhumance, going with the sheep in the summer up into the mountains and coming back with them in the beginning of autumn. Then in the autumn, it's not so much like festivals, but it's like fairs, shepherds fairs, where they sell sheep. That's the time when you sell them. In the spring, you don't sell the sheep. For example, I live in Sibiu, which is like the most famous area for shepherding in Romania. So we have the biggest shepherds fair in the country, 1 hour from where I live here. But then there is some other ones, where they sell sheepdogs, bells, sticks, buckets, all kinds of clothing for shepherds, all kinds of things that are somehow related to practicing this job as
Right.
shepherds.
So it's the opportunity for them to sell their wares
Yeah.
and restock.
Yes, and that's also the time when they sell the ram. Because in the summertime, when they go with the sheep, they don't go with the rams. They don't want them to get pregnant. But once they come down to the valley, they buy the rams from one of these markets or directly from other farmers that they know. And then, they let them mingle.
Okay. to create more sheep for the next season.
Yes, because the next sheep have to come in time by the next Easter. They have to be ready to be lamb meal,
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned medieval festivals. Do those relate to the whole Dracula lore? And is there cultural significance to Dracula and vampires? Or is that basically sort of an aspect of tourism?
So Dracula, there is 2 aspects to it. Yes, the kind of real stuff and the unreal stuff. Okay, so Dracula, it's a real name that was given to a family as a kind of like a nickname in the 1400s.
Right.
Okay, there was this family who was a ruler of Wallachia, so they're actually not from Transylvania. And there was this ruler who was a member of the Order of the Dragon. And from dragon, it kind of got to Dracula. In Romanian, Dracula means devil. Okay, so that's where the name originated. And Vlad, the famous one that we know, was actually the son of this guy who got the name Dracula. So from then on, kind of started the Dracula family. Okay, and Vlad, okay, in our history, he's seen as a positive character. I mean, he defended our country and he mostly fought with the Turks. And at the time, he was actually seen a hero of Christianity, okay, by the Pope, by important religious leaders in Europe and, emperors and so on. We were at the forefront of the battle between Christianity and the Ottomans. So in our history, he's positive. That's where the name Dracula comes from. And then the whole thing with the vampires, those are more like myths, which was turned into a book by this Irish writer, Bram Stoker, who then took the name Dracula because probably he thought it's really cool. And apparently it is very cool because it's so easy to remember and so many people know it.
Right.
So he created this fiction book with vampires and some sort of count. And the action happened somewhere in Transylvania and it became famous. So for us, vampires and things mean really nothing. And Vlad, for us, it's historical character for which at school, when we learn about him, we don't learn anything about the Dracula story, but we learn about the good things that he's done. Romania generally and the Romanian Ministry of Tourism doesn't really promote the idea of Dracula because it's not real.
Right.
We try to attract people to visit Romania for what it is rather than what it's not. Okay?
Yeah. So on that note, are there any particular resources or websites or books that you can recommend for travelers to better acquaint themselves with Romanian culture?
Yeah, so I think a good website is the one of the Romanian Tourism Board.
Hmm.
It's romaniatourism.com. Besides that, there is a British journalist who fell in love with Romania, and he made many documentaries about Romania. They present Romania, also the history, the culture, and so on. Also tries to promote what is there to see and do, and tries to promote people to come here. He first made a series called Wild Carpathia,
Mm.
and this can be found on YouTube. And then later on, he made a series called Flavors of Romania, which can be found on Netflix.
Oh, cool. Great.
So, there is episodes there covering different parts of the country, regions, or traditions. Yeah, it's promoted by this British guy, which in a way I think gets more credibility because it's not a Romanian talking about Romania.
Mm.
It's a foreigner who actually lives here and talks about Romania and what he thinks is worth it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So, besides doing photo tours and general trips, you also offer genealogical tours. How do those work?
Yeah, so genealogical tours is for people who have roots here in
Hmm.
Romania. We had a serious wave of people leaving from Romania to the US around 1900, the decade before World War One. I was contacted by quite a few of those people. They want to know from where they came. They want to get to know the village. I mean, they want to know maybe like a family tree. They want to then visit the country and see the places where their family lived, maybe find some relatives. But at the same time, they do want to come and see how is the country like.
Right.
Yeah. So I've done some of those. It's common, nowadays. I've noticed there is a lot of people from the US who try to find their ancestry, their origin. And then there is other people who left more recently. For example, the Jews from Romania who left and moved to US or Israel. I also had contact with some of them also wanting to come back and see where they came from.
Interesting. So, how far back generally do historical records go in Romania in terms of family history?
So we've had all these different ethnic groups, and each of them had their church. And it depends which group they're from. The Romanians kept church records, but until about middle of 19th century, it was written in Slavic with
Uh
Slavic
huh.
letters.
Hmm.
So I could find records from early 1800s, but it was difficult to understand.
Right.
Handwritten, all Slavonic, it was tough. So
Mm.
that's kind of where it stops.
Hmm.
Maybe like middle 1800s for the ones who have Romanian origins. The ones who have German origins, like the Transylvanian Saxons or the Schwabs from Banat, those records go even further back.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find things from the 1700s or even 1600s if you're really lucky, or even earlier, if they were from some more famous family and
Right.
so on.
Right. Right.
Yeah. There, the church and the authorities have been much better at keeping records, and they are kept in either German or Hungarian, but with Latin alphabet, not
Yeah.
Cyrillic alphabet. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
And they chose the people writing by hand much, much carefully.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So on those types of tours, do you help facilitate finding the records, or is that up to the people going on the tours to track down?
Yeah, nowadays people can do some of their own research on websites like
Hmm.
ancestry.com, or they do this DNA testing, and then they are matched with I don't know how many people. But
Right.
then at some point you kind of hit a roadblock and you don't find the information anymore. So that's when some of them turn to me. I've personally done some research for families, especially from the US, into the old archive records,
Hmm.
and found many interesting things. And then, yes, they tell me how far to go because at some point you
Right.
got to stop.
Right. It can be a real rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's a very fascinating and worthwhile service that you provide. So, Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on Romanian culture and your insights on making pictures there. But before we go, we'd like to end with a short visual questionnaire inspired by the TV show Inside the Actor's Studio. It's a short list of questions with one-sentence answers. So, Daniel Rosca, with all things being equal, what's your preference, black and white or color?
Color.
And which image orientation do you gravitate to? Horizontal, vertical, or square?
Landscape.
So
Horizontal, I guess.
horizontal.
Yes.
Yes. What's your favorite lens preference, prime or zoom?
Zoom.
And if you could only carry one lens, what would it be?
My 2470.
Yes, you mentioned that earlier. What's the most important thing you look for at the moment you click the shutter?
Well, with people, I not only choose the people as the subject and how they look and so on, but I do try to be very careful about the background.
Mm-hmm.
So I learn not to shoot if I don't like the background.
Mm. Good point.
Yeah.
What one photographer, living or dead, has influenced your work the most?
Um, in 2011, when I started this, I started working with a Romanian photographer. His name is Sorino Nishor. Well, he introduced me to this field, and I've learned a lot from him. And I admire his love for the Romanian rural culture, which he still photographs and promotes. But after that, I've met many other great photographers from which I've learned many other things. But I would say he was the
He was
most
the start.
influential. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Other than photography, what profession or craft would you most like to explore?
Well, I like old stuff, you know. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, now I collect old objects, and I bought a house in a village here close to CBU, which I want to renovate. It's an old farmer's house, which has character and a history, which I want to preserve and renovate.
And finally, in a single word, what's your biggest motivation for taking pictures?
Um, well, you capture and preserve that moment. And I can say I know why I started when I bought my first camera. And I know my current motivation I had to change lenses because I have small kids and I wanted to take a lot more pictures of them. I want to capture them as they were, as
Yeah.
kids, as growing at 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, I want to have those memories.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with all these traditions or traditional ways of doing things or traditional people. I try to capture those because I believe by the time I'm going to be really old or my kids are going to be old, many of those things are not going to be around.
Right. So preservation sounds like the perfect word to sum it all up.
Yeah.
So, as we mentioned earlier, you currently offer tours for both photographers and travelers interested in various aspects of Romanian culture. Do you have any upcoming tours or events our listeners should know about?
Well, so I do private tours for people who come to me and say we're a family and we want to come. For example, I think my next tour is for Easter
Mm,
with a group from Thailand. This is some who have been before to Romania and they liked it very much and they want to come back again to experience Easter in Romania. One thing I like about Romania is that we have the 4 seasons
right.
and each season brings something else, in terms of how the landscape looks like, but also in terms of what people do. And it also comes with different holidays, right? The Easter is in spring, the Christmas is in winter, and so on. So I've kind of developed themes around the seasons, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in the summer, I like to focus on the haymaking activities and the farming, but also the traditional weddings that happen at that time of the year. In the autumn, we have the fall colors and the harvest
Mm-hmm.
activities and the shepherds coming back. And in the winter, we have this Christmas and New Year traditions and celebrations, plus the wintry landscape. So I feel privileged that I'm in a country that is so rich culturally and historically that I can offer different kind of things to people at different times of the year.
Yeah. Or a window on the culture.
Yes.
So, where can guests find out more about you and your work?
I have two main websites. So one is Romania Photo Tours. Then there is True Romania Tours, which is for my more like cultural genealogy tours. And then on Facebook, the same two names. And on Instagram, Romania Photo Tours.
Great. Well, Daniel Rosca, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for your time and all the great information you provided about Romanian culture.
Well, thank you very much, Jill, for giving me this opportunity to tell more about Romania to a group of people who are, I'm sure, interested in culture and history and so on, but who obviously have an interest in photography.
Yes. Okay. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, if you've enjoyed this show, we'd love to hear about it. Pull up this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure that subscribe button is clicked for automatic updates about every episode release. While you're there, please leave us a comment. We're waiting for your feedback. You can also find us and drop us a line on the Explora blog, where we post photos from our guests along with the show notes. And if you're a fan of social media, please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast Group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast creative producer and host of this series. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Theme music for this series was composed by Gabriel Richards. Our executive producer is Bjorn Peterson, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.